And here with us to further discuss diversity on campus is Professor Jody Armour. He teaches at the Gould School of Law here at USC with a focus on racial bias in the justice system. He's appeared on many TV and radio programs to speak about race relations. Professor Armour, so glad that you could join us today.
Good to be with you.
All right, so Professor Armour, there have been a number of incidents where students of color say that they have been racially profiled here on campus. Could you maybe comment on their claims?
Yeah, well, to be racially profiled is to be treated differently because of your race. So what you're saying is a similarly situated white person would not have been stopped by the police, would not have been asked questions. I was, in part because he made an inference about me based on my racial identity. And the question is, are people always being racist when they discriminate against others on the basis of their racial identity? What we're finding in some of the psychological studies is sometimes well-meaning people who are racially liberal and don't intend to discriminate, unconsciously discriminate against outgroup members like blacks. Not meaning to, they treat them differently because of their unconscious psychological processes. So that's the problem. You can have racism without racists, if you will. You can have discrimination without conscious wrongdoing by the people doing the discriminating. So that's one of the things that we're learning from modern psychology, and it's one of the things that makes the profiling debate so difficult and so full of dilemmas and trouble.
You work with police officers and guards and things like that to kind of talk to them about their own biases. Yeah. How do you approach those individuals without offending them?
Yeah, the key thing is not to go into these conversations just talking about racism or racist. Nobody wants to view themselves as a racist. Even if you talk about unconscious racism, no one wants to view themselves as an unconscious racist. Just that label is so distasteful that a lot of people try to distinguish and distance themselves from it. I find it's much better to talk about mental habits. Look, we're all creatures of habit. And all a stereotype is a well-learned set of associations, like a habit, that can run automatically without your conscious awareness, also like a habit. So an example of a stereotype would be a 3-year-old white girl who, in Phyllis Katz's piece in the New York Times, said to her mother upon seeing a black infant, "Look, Mom, a baby made." Now that 3-year-old little girl isn't a bigot, she's not a racist. All she's doing is reporting an association that's been forged in her memory between women from a certain social identity and a social role she commonly sees them in. She may turn 18, reach the age of judgment, and come to renounce that as an appropriate way to think about black women. Her personal standards may be egalitarian, but that doesn't mean that well-learned set of associations has disappeared. So now she has the possibility of unconscious bias established in her memory that can spring out and affect her perceptions and judgments without her conscious awareness.
Absolutely, and that's kind of the problem, is that even those of us who don't think that the things that we're doing are racist or or done with bias, we're doing them unconsciously. And so, in terms of campus, bringing this conversation back to campus climate, yes. What do you think that what's the role of the administration in tackling this type of unconscious prejudice? What are the types of things that we could do?
Yeah, I think our administration, like many administrations around the country, are trying to take diversity, inclusion, campus climate issues seriously. Certainly ours, I think, has kind of gotten ahead of the curve some and had some discussions about diversity and was forming committees even before some of the big events happening around Tim Wolf and the University of Missouri, where the president stepped down in response to student activism and athlete activism, et cetera. I think that our provost has actually been ahead of that curve and has been taking some proactive steps at addressing this. So what you need are things like, let's have lots of discussions about the nature of unconscious bias. Let's start to talk about ways that we can combat unconscious bias, because one of the things we've learned is that to combat an unconscious habit, a mental habit, requires intention, attention, and effort. Think about any bad habit that you're trying to break. If you're trying to break a bad habit, whenever you're in the presence of environmental cues that trigger the habitual responses, you have to bring to mind your conscious commitments for how you want to go forward. It takes intention, attention, and effort. In other words, it takes color consciousness, not color blindness. You can't, for a long time people have said, oh, if you're just color blind, you can get over discrimination. You know, it's kind of that old Stephen Colbert joke when he used to say, you know, I may have black black friends, but I don't know because I don't see race. Some people tell me I have black friends. Of course, we all see race. We see, gender. It's in our mental processes to recognize that, and then the unconscious processes can get started. So it takes attention, intention, and effort to combat these unconscious biases. And for example, give me one quick example. The Trayvon Martin case of how you might do this. And Trayvon Martin, remember, 17-year-old black male, went to get some iced tea, Arizona iced tea and Skittles, and George Zimmerman shot him and argued stand your ground, who was a non-black shooter, right? Try some racial role reversal and see if you have the same response. Say, make Trayvon Martin a 17-year-old Brad Pitt, and make George Zimmerman, I don't know, Wesley Snipes, some familiar black person that you know. A lot of people are going to have a different reaction to those facts. I'm not so sure there's an acquittal in that case under those facts because race matters. So, there are exercises like that in which we can try to consciously confront our own stereotypes, our own unconscious habits, our own biases, and try to resist succumbing to them. But it takes work. It takes a commitment as a community. We have to start looking at discrimination not as just something bad people do, but that we all do because it's part of our cultural belief system. We're swimming in stereotypes all the time. So it's a collective problem that we need a collective solution to.
Your work in law, like I was mentioned earlier, focuses on the way that biases shape policy. And so are there any particular policy changes you feel like need to be made?
Okay, let's start with our smaller society, the one we have more control over, our own campus. We can start with honest conversations. What the Black Lives Matter movement has effectively done over the last 18 to 24 months and raised consciousness around the nation, around racial justice issues, is follow two practices. Number one, disruption. We're going to shut it down, cut through complacency, about these kinds of issues, number one. So, and then number two, uncomfortable conversations. Let's have, so we don't need necessarily a lot of disruption. What we do need is a willingness to embrace, right now I don't think on campus, right, because we're having a conversation now, we're moving in the right direction. Now it's a matter of, are we ready to have the uncomfortable conversations? And I think that's, can we have forums? Can we have plenty of opportunities in the classroom and out to have difficult conversations that can help us all grow? Because USC students are going to go out into the world and be leaders. And to be a leader in an increasingly multicultural world, you have to understand differences among people and how to lead with a lot of diversity in the world around you. So this is a great training ground for stepping outside these walls and learning how to deal with inclusion and diversity in the campus setting. You
may have heard about Texas at Texas A&M. There were some students who, high school students who were visiting, and they were subject to racial slurs from some of the university students on campus. So that's an instance of overt racism, and the administration responded by sending these high school students apology letters, handwritten cards for them. Said, we're sorry for what happened. Do you think that response is adequate?
Well, that's a good start, recognizing the harm, the injury, the kind of, that words like that can wound the psyches of these young people. That's a good start. I think a lot of people might want a more punitive response toward the people who made the statements. And I don't think that always the most punitive response is always the best. Sometimes we have to, especially in a college setting, try for an educative approach. We've got to try to take these as teachable moments and try to educate toward tolerance and towards more unity around them. So I'm not necessarily saying that there shouldn't be some reaction by the administration, some process, but I wouldn't necessarily look for the most punitive response possible. I'd look for an opportunity to say, what does it mean to be a member of this community? How can we treat one another more as the kind of group that we want to be and take a more positive rather than punitive approach?
Absolutely, and thank you so much. We're out of time, unfortunately.
Good talking
to you. But thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Awesome.